Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson. Thank you to our sponsor, VGM Advantage, who provides valuable resources and services to physical therapy businesses, including group purchasing, compliance programs, website design, and insurance products through PT1, to name a few. In this episode, we have a great guest, Mike Connors. Mike received his Master's of Physical Therapy degree from the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, Rutgers University, in 2003. Mike has a post-professional Doctor of Physical Therapy degree from Temple University in 2008. He became a board-certified specialist in orthopedic physical therapy from the American Board of PT Specialties in 2011. Dr. Connors obtained a PhD in physical therapy with an emphasis in applied biomechanics from Texas Women's University in August of 2017. Mike is currently a manual therapy fellow in training with Optum. He is an outside consultant for a professional ballet company and owner of Metroplex Performing Arts Medicine in Fort Worth, Texas, and is an adjunct professor in orthopedic physical therapy and business leadership for the DPT program at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. In addition, Mike is currently president of the Texas Physical Therapy Association, advocating for regulatory and payment policy issues impacting PT and healthcare. Well, welcome to the program, Mike. Really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
So how does a New Jersey boy wind up living and working in Texas?
That's a good question. I married a Texan.
Oh, okay. So
that old saying, I wasn't born there, but I got there as quick as I could.
That's great. Okay, so you've been in Texas for how long now?
15 years.
Yeah, well, that's great. So it sounds like from your bio that your private practice is a niche practice focusing on performing arts and in the performing arts industry. How did you get into those circles? Kind of tell us how that got started.
So I was teaching in an entry-level PT program, and we had a clinical presence in that department, and we started a collaboration with our manipulative medicine colleagues. That department had recruited a performing arts specialist, PM&R physician, to the university, and we just got to talking one day over, what are some potential really interesting collaborations that could come about if we married our skills in the sense, from a medical perspective, but also from the rehab perspective. A lot of his experience was more in the performing arts realm, specifically to musicians and to ballet dancers. At that exact time, we had started a departmental collaboration in the PT department with a local professional ballet company. So it all kind of fell into place.
Oh, that's amazing. So when you're working with that type of population, how is it different? What's the typical patient like when you're working with that population?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it more or less is almost like a work comp population because they're employed dancers, at least in that ballet company we work with. So they're contracted employees. When they don't work, they don't get paid like many other injured workers. So our job really is to keep them in the game. I think of us as like the training support or rehabilitation support, keeping them at their high levels of performance for 38 weeks a year for the full length of their season.
Wow. And that's, from a physical perspective, that's probably not easy to do, to stay at that high level of performance for that long a period of time. I would assume there are quite a few injuries that you're dealing with.
There are lots of repetitive stress type stuff, your sprains, strains, those type things. Occasionally we'll have stress fractures. We try to screen ahead of time. We actually employ, I believe it's now 6 part-time physical therapists that actually provide on-site coverage. That company is a collaboration between a physician, that physician and myself as the principals, and then we employ the physical therapists that provide on-site services. So at this point, I do more of like the epidemiological analysis, the care coordination, that type of stuff, instead of the direct patient care. but we're actually going into our sixth season with the ballet company now.
Oh wow, that's great. That's great. I suppose that's is that real rewarding work for you as well? Is it something that you really enjoy doing?
It is, and it actually started off, interestingly enough and ironically enough, as just a total side hustle, just something that I was just doing to give back to the community because there's not huge margins in it, just because it's a not-for-profit organization. I still work full time for a different private practice in more of a administrative leadership capacity. So it continued to just be that sort of side project that has continued to evolve over the last couple of years. This year we added a massage therapist. Next year there's talks of adding in a sports psychologist. We added in another physician to the team last season. So we've seen year-over-year growth, not just in the offerings that we have, but also just in the strength of our relationship.
Yeah, that's great. So tell us a little bit more about the leadership role that you have in the other physical therapy setting.
So I'm part of a company called Greater Therapy Centers. They've been around for about 20 years, back in 2018, 15. And I've worked with them in some capacity on and off for about 15 years. But back in 2015, they had acquired a clinic that needed a leadership transition from its current manager to me, just to stabilize the clinic, kind of move it forward. So I left academics, went back into full-time private practice, transitioned that clinic over the course of a year through a few staff changes, change in ownership, which is always challenging. The change that occurred right before I started. But then the owner left within the first year after we acquired that. You know what that's like.
Yeah.
So lots of peaks and valleys that year. But then hired a former student of mine who was just a strong leader, even 2 years out of school, and took over that clinic a year into it. And then over the course of the last 2.5 years, I've transitioned more into a regional director role. I now oversee 5 clinics in that capacity.
So explain a little bit more about that, because I think you're right. That does happen often, and those are challenging, transitions. So what leadership skills do you use, and what do you focus on when you're trying to take a clinic from a past owner to the present ownership and kind of get it back on track and get it to your way of thinking? So what leadership strategies or approaches do you use for that?
I consider myself a servant leader. So I think that you have to get down in the trenches with your people. It just can't be one of those where, we walked into that clinic and said, okay, we're going to put a different name on the door. We're going to have probably a couple different referral sources, and we just want you to do it this way. So I went back in treating full time. That first year, I was treating probably about 40 hours a week, just being there with the current staff and showing them that, what I'm asking you to do, I'm doing myself. I'm rolling up my sleeves. I'm coming in early. I work 2 late nights a week till 7. And I hadn't done that in years, but it's what the clinic needed. And they needed to see that there was a person that was, doing and behaving in the way that they were modeling. And then the other thing is, I think they just listening. I went in and I didn't try to change a lot at first. I went in and did a lot of listening, sat back and shut up for once and just said, okay, let me learn. Let me get to know the people. And after, good month, 6 weeks of getting to know the therapists that were there, the front office, the technicians, the referral sources, because a lot of them were unfamiliar to me, really had a good, solid team feeling. And I think that really helped us set the stable foundation for the growth of that clinic into the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I do believe that listening is probably one of the greatest leadership tools you can develop, and not everybody does it. It reminds me of a story that Atul Gawande just was hired by Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett and Diamond, who are putting together this healthcare company for their companies to try and fix what's broken, so to speak. And so Atul Gawande was asked by media, well, so what are you going to do? What's your strategy? What's going to happen? And I thought it was so cool because he said, well, I'm not ready to talk about that yet because I just need to listen a lot and learn a lot before I come up with a strategy. So I thought that was refreshing, as opposed to somebody just saying, "This is what I'm going to do," right out of the get-go. So
it's amazing. And even when I've interviewed, in the past for other opportunities and for directors or vice president level positions, and people ask you questions like, well, what do you plan to do in your first 90 days? And what sorts of initiatives are you bringing from the outside in? It's like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Shut up and listen and, bring best practice ideas and things like that. But I get worried and a little uneased when new leaders come in and they're so gung-ho on changing things in the first 30, 60, 90 days. Like, you haven't even put your feet on the ground and sat down with someone over a meal and talked about, hey, who are you? And, I want to get to know you. And until you've done that, I think it's hard to get people to buy into what you bring to the table if you don't try to meet them where they are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So now you went back to school to get your DPT, which was admirable, but then you went back again to get your PhD. So are you just like crazy, or you just love school?
No, man, I'm both. I left private practice in 2009 with Greater Therapy. I was running 2 clinics and decided that I wanted to give academics a try. A new program was starting in Fort Worth, which was close to home, and it sounded like a really cool opportunity. So I just finished my DPT the year before, and about a year and a half into working as a full-time faculty member and kind of still doing some PRN stuff, it became pretty evident that lasting power in academics is a terminal academic degree. That something that you kind of have a seat at the table. So I started the degree in 2010, 2011. And by the time I left in 2015, academics full-time, it was like, I'm this far along. I had like another year and a half of my dissertation data collection. I couldn't walk away from it at that point. Yeah. The interesting thing now, not being in academics full-time, I think it actually has helped make me a better leader and clinician, if that makes, and, just overall well-rounded thinker, if that makes any sense at all.
Sure.
Just because I look at things more objectively than I ever have.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I mean, PhD is not easy. It takes a lot of time and a lot of extra effort. So that's impressive. So expand on that a little bit. So you say that it's made you a better leader. So give us some more ideas on why you think it makes you a better leader, other than just having a bigger vision, so to speak.
I think that, if you break it down to its most basic concept, is you just look at things more, like I said, objectively. Like you're looking at whole situations. When you do a large data analysis, or you're doing an investigative type trial, like you're looking at so many different variables, and you're training your brain throughout an entire PhD process to just look at the big picture, be able to break it down into its little fractured pieces, and then how do those fractured pieces help tell a story with the outcomes. And I think taking that same concept to a leadership situation, you're really able to step back away from the situation, analyze it objectively, and you're putting more time into that analysis because your brain's already been trained to do that. And you tend to look at things, I think, more globally with a broader vision and the ability to take in a lot more variables than I think when you're just in a clinical mind and you're just cranking through a day, trying to see patients, trying to manage people, trying to put out fires, trying to, just do the day in and day out. I think through a PhD process, your brain you don't get smarter, you get more efficient in your thinking. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Now, you're currently the president of Texas Physical Therapy Association. So how did you get into leadership roles within this chapter of APTA?
So I had a colleague locally that asked me to go to a meeting probably about 12 or 13 years ago. And so I went and I left that meeting being like the membership chair of our district, which I didn't think. You know how that goes.
Oh, yeah. And got to be present to win, right?
Absolutely. And so it just kind of spiraled from there. Got involved at the district level, then the state level. I have a huge passion for advocacy at the state and national level, so became the GAC chair or co-chair for two terms. And then someone said, hey, we really think that you should put your name in and run for, board position. We like what you're saying. We like some of the things that you've done. We like your style and personality. And so I ran in 2014, I think. Okay, yeah, it's in my second term now. And won, and then, ran for re-election because, asked the board, am I doing a good enough job? Is something you can put up with for 3 more years? And the consensus was yes. So ran again, and now in the first year of my second term.
Yeah. So now you become president, which must have felt pretty good. But then, from what I hear, your leadership was really tested when you had some challenges from some members. So what happened, and how did you work through that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, we had some member challenges early on. Just we transitioned executive directors about a year and a half into my tenure. And you know how that goes. Leadership transition is never easy, especially when it involves staff in an organization. So we kind of navigated through that. We had a really contentious legislative session this last legislative session, which would have been in 2017. So it just created a lot of angst, I think, among our members, just with transitions, and then with just that kind of feeling that the profession's in evolution, people feeling like members feeling like they were in the dark, they weren't being communicated with real well. So it really led to a pretty, I don't know what the word is, probably a pretty pervasive frustration from our membership, just in overall member satisfaction and just member engagement. So we just started communicating and started really going out, talking to members. We had another transition of an executive director, one who embraced communication. Not that our past executive directors didn't, but he just really wanted to try to improve that feeling among members immediately. So rather than get into the position, slowly evolve over time. So we just started reaching out to members, having conversations about, kind of what was going on at the chapter level, what some of our initiatives were. We asked members what they wanted. Do you want us to fight for direct access for the 12th legislative session in a row? Or do you want us to take a break and focus on something else, for example? And then from there, we just started to try to start to re-engage one member at a time. And it's actually resulted in some pretty positive member growth and retention opportunities.
Yeah, when I hear the story, it's interesting because communication, as you know, is everything, and when you're all under the same roof, you still need to do it, but I think it's a little bit more manageable. Then if you have multiple sites, I think it gets more complicated. But now I'm thinking, now you've got basically a volunteer organization with members who you rarely see, except maybe once a year at a conference or something. And so to make that communication and improve it, it sounds like a Herculean task. And so I guess I hear what you're saying is you just put boots on the ground and went out and talked to people face to face. That was the approach?
Yeah, absolutely. And just got everyone on the same page. I mean, I like the fact you brought up communication. And it's everything. Every time that I encounter an issue, whether it's in my full-time job, at home, it's in a professional association, 90% of the time or more comes down to some form of either presence or lack of communication. And so we started with our board, our executive committee, our board, our staff, and at least in the association, and just got that buy-in. And once we had the buy-in for the core group, of volunteers, reaching out to the 7,000 plus members didn't seem like such a Herculean task because at that point we had a common vision. And from there, we're able to be pretty effective in our message delivery.
Yeah, and that's another great lesson, too, is that getting that executive team or board all on the same plane and all believing in the same vision and all speaking the same language, that definitely makes a big difference. So it sounds like you did a great job to do that. So sounds great. So, it's interesting you bring that up too, because I think that a lot of times what I've seen in PT practices is directors that are in leadership positions, we're so busy treating patients and getting the charting done and managing staff and doing whatever, the director does. I've tried to tell, people that I've mentored or coached before is that, look for the little things that you can do, and praise them, and tell them they're doing a good job, and pats on the back, and have that positive communication, because I think what happens so much is that the only communication happens when there's something negative that comes up, or there's something that needs to be corrected. And I believe if you really want to motivate your staff and get them part of the team, you've got to. I think you've got to praise them, and be positive with them more than negative, or it just doesn't work.
You're absolutely right. And I think even another perspective too, how many times do we take clinicians that are really solid clinicians and we say, you know what, you're going to be a great leader. Let's put you in a management role. And we just say, okay, so today you're a therapist, tomorrow you're a director, and these are the expectations I have for you. Go knock the ball out of the park. And so often, it'd almost be like picking up your kid at like a year and saying, okay, go ahead and start running. Like, no, you got to walk before you run. And
no, so true. You're speaking my language now, because it's what I've always said is that, leadership skills, or being a great leader, takes practice, it takes instruction, it takes mentoring. It's just like being a clinician. You become a better clinician because you work at it, and you study it, and you learn from others, and you practice it, and you do all that. And I think you have to do the same thing in leadership. So just to assume that just because someone's a good physical therapist, then you're going to be a great leader, I think that's a bad assumption, and I think it gets people in situations that sometimes they struggle with, just as you said.
We do it all the time. I mean, how many large companies do you even know that still do it? And that's where my role has evolved more with our company. Is we're now taking the time and doing a leadership academy and trying to develop leaders as clinicians and giving them opportunities. You want to develop as a clinician, as a leader, or as a clinician leader, and giving them a clear path, or a clinical ladder, if you will. So we're not having the same situation, because you put those people into those roles, and communication problems do happen because they're not used to communicating, and they're great with communication with patients. They don't communicate well with their colleagues necessarily when conflict arises, and then you have turnover. And it's this cycle that's just, it took a lot of us a long time to learn it, but now that we do, we're like, we're not making that mistake again.
Yeah. Well, I salute you. I just think that is awesome. And so few physical therapy companies or clinics really take the time to really do that. And I think you said it perfectly. We have to work at it. We have to model it. We have to mentor it. We have to coach it. And it takes time to develop. But if you take the time to do it, then hopefully, down the road, things are much easier and go much better because you put in the time. And so it's great. I'm so happy to hear you're doing that. I think that's really a smart move.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
What do you feel is the biggest challenge that we as a profession are facing today?
Apathy.
Yeah.
I think the fact that we're not, we're so focused on the present, we're not looking to the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think there's so many of our colleagues that are running around saying the sky is falling, and they're focused on payment. They're focused on every little individual contract. They're focused on, every little minute detail, which I get. I mean, business is business, and you have to exist, and you have to be profitable, and you want to grow, but we're losing sight, I think, of the big opportunities that are on the horizon. These collaborative models of care. I think what Bezos and Buffett are doing, it's strategic in one sense, and it's evolutionary in the other. Because they're looking at what the future of healthcare could be should be, instead of how do we take the current broken system and duct tape it for another generation. And I think that's where we have the best opportunity, but I also think that's where we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot as a profession.
Yeah, and how do we bridge that gap? Because I think many of us would say it's broken, it needs to change, and I have some interesting ideas on how to do that, but yet I still have to work in the system that I'm forced to work in that I acknowledge is broken. So you kind of have your foot in both in both pools to begin with there, and then at some point you're gonna jump over and hopefully do something new and innovative. So I think that's a real challenge for people to know when that time is to switch. You don't want to be left behind, but on the other hand, if you jump too soon, no revenue means you're out of business.
True. I think one thing, at least I see in my area, is our company does work with some collaborative hospital arrangements, and the interesting collaboration or communication that evolved over time between our private practice colleague competitors that aren't on that and into those agreements that has been at times a little strenuous, just because I think there's some let's say some jealousy or whatnot, but it's like, well, I'm not doing what they're doing, or they're not doing what I'm doing, so different is bad. Whereas I think we have an opportunity now for private practices, corporate entities, hospital organizations to kind of start to come together and have some discussions about best practice in payment policy, those variables that would have a better voice than just a bunch of private practices getting together and saying, we don't like this system, we think it's broken, this is how we think it should be fixed. And the hospitals on the other side saying, well, these are our ideas. And the large corporations of the world saying, well, wait a minute, this is corporate America. This is how we think that we should fix it. I think somewhere in all of that brain power, you could harness into some pretty cool ideas that would involve some unique collaborative models that wouldn't be so siloed in those different practice arrangements.
Yeah, so one of my mantras for a long time was collaborate or die, and I totally agree with you. So do you feel like you have to give up something to collaborate? Do you have to go backwards to go forward, or do you have to be more open-minded and give up some things?
I don't think you have to give up things. I think you have to look at things more openly and collaboratively. And I think if you're looking at the fact that, okay, maybe I give up a little bit of control in this arena, but I look at, the evolution. How does your organization evolve? How do you grow? How do you have long-lasting sustainability? I've read an article from a local business owner here in Texas who just acquired a company, and his quote was something to the effect of, I'm not impressed with growth as much as I am impressed with longevity. And I've been thinking about it all day and thinking about it leading up to this conversation. I was like, that's it right there. Growth is amazing, but legacy is impressive.
Yeah, sustainability of something good takes skill and practice. I would agree.
But I don't think you have to give up necessarily. I think if you can choose how you're going to structure those collaborations, I think you can still look to growth and sustainability over time, and recognize what the win for each group is, or each organization. I mean, we've sat down a couple times as an organization and said, okay, this is what this is going to mean for us from a business perspective, and this is what it's going to mean for this other organization from a business perspective. When we come together, things might change slightly, but the outcome is going to be exponential improvement in A, B, C, and D. And so we've really tried to look at it from what's the win for both, and how can we put those wins together to have an even bigger impact on the patients we serve.
And you would think in a field like healthcare, where I think everyone would agree that the more we could collaborate with different caregivers and whatever, it'd be in the patient's best interest, and they would probably get better in the long run. With that having been said, why do we struggle so much with this collaboration?
I think it's I don't want to say the old guard, but I think it's that keep the cards close to your vest. If you and I compete in the same market, and you and I have a conversation, and I tell you some of the cool things I'm doing, and you tell me some of the cool things you're doing, we're going to walk away from that meeting and start doing what each other does. I think that's the mindset, where it's like, I have meetings with private practice owners in my area all the time. We sit down and we're like, we're thinking about doing this year. And they're like, man, we lost our shirt doing that last year. Well, why? Well, we did it this way. And we thought it was going to be this, and it wasn't this. Like, we have these open, collaborative type conversations. We're not signing NDAs. We're not signing, we're just having value. Now, we're not opening our books and saying, here, this is all we do. But we're having dialogue about how do we keep our practices alive? How do we each experience growth in our areas? How do we learn from each other's successes and failures? And I think that's the piece that the comfort level of having that discussion is lacking in not just our sector in therapy, it's lacking in medicine and I think healthcare in general.
Yeah, and I think that's why, I know that you've been involved, as I've been involved in the private practice section of APTA. And that's always a great networking opportunity because you're talking with people that aren't in your neighborhood, and you can be more open and you can talk more, sharing ideas and whatever. So I think that's why we love meetings like that. On the other hand, I don't think I've ever seen or experienced if I told somebody too much or I saw somebody telling somebody too much that they went and stole their business. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. So I think it's a false concern, but I agree with you. A lot of small business owners in physical therapy are very controlling or very cautious with the information they have and not always willing to share. And I just think it would benefit everyone if we were just more open, just as you explained, to share ideas and push this thing forward. I think we would all benefit.
I was at a meeting probably about 2 years ago, and you think I had said, something horrible that was like almost like a heretic for the small business group. It was a group of small, 1 to 3 location practice owners. And I threw it out there. I was like, what if we started collaborating? What if we started to look at these large corporate entities that are throwing up, 20 clinics a year because they have the funding to do so? If you take private outside funding, equity partners, something like that, you get this huge cash infusion that you can do a lot of cool things with in a really rapid time frame. And we start collaborating and we start, looking at long-term small practice, small business sustainability. And the reaction was not what you and I are discussing as what should be. It was very much of, well, no, I've been in this for 25 years and the only way to survive is to keep doing what I'm doing and keep doing it myself and focus on my business. And it's like, half the people that were in that room 2 or 3 years ago aren't even in business anymore.
Yeah. I wonder why. So if we learn from our failures, if we can agree on that, what is a big mistake that you made in business, and what did you learn from it?
It's a great question. I think one of the early things I didn't do was realize that I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I don't know it all.
Yeah.
and for some of us, that's a hard pill to swallow. And so it was the recognition that they're getting outside input from experts and from people that are knowledgeable and experienced doesn't make us less of a business person or successful in that venture. It just means that we'll recognize that we're not the smartest in the room at that time, and we need help. And I wish I would have done that a little earlier on. So that's probably what I would say is probably the thing I've learned the most is find the people that have done it and have learned or that do things really well, and shut up and listen.
Yeah, I mean, I've read a ton of biographies and I've done a lot of interviews, and that's such a common theme that, as soon as you think it's all about you, you're in trouble. And then the second thing is surround yourself with those good people, train them well, mentor them, and then let them do their job, get out of their way. So I think that's a great point. So when you're retired and your kids are all grown, what do you hope they'll say about you and your leadership role as a physical therapist?
That's a really good question. I'm hoping that they say that I developed or gave people the opportunity to do what they wanted to do and develop leaders that had long-term sustainability. My favorite phrase and my favorite thing to do is hire the right people and get out of their way. I don't think I'm some, expert hiring guru or that I, have a crystal ball where I always find the right person for the position. But I do believe that the single best thing that I will do as a manager and a leader will be hire people that will help us grow or that will help us be successful in whatever that is, for the association, for our company, for practice. So that's my hope is looking back. I mean, I'm 39. I hope to have a long career, but I hope that I look back and I can say, yeah, I had a lasting impact on an organization, and that when I left, the organization was better for me having been a part of it than me not being a part of it.
Well, you're way down that path, so that's awesome. So if you could have a 60-minute discussion with anyone past or present, and you can't choose God or Jesus, who would you like to sit down with and have a conversation?
There's three people that come to mind, and and I know I have to choose one of them. I would say it would be Steve Jobs, it would be Warren Buffett, it would be Jeff Bezos. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I put the three of them together is they both built something from nothing, and I'm fascinated by that. Jobs and Bezos specifically, like, started off in the garage, and then built two of the largest companies in the world. Buffett's just a mastermind. So the one that probably fascinates me the most at this stage of the game is Bezos. You go back 30 years ago, and the guy was selling half-price books out of a garage, and now he's the richest man in the world. And he's got the largest company in the world, and it doesn't happen overnight by accident. So that would probably be the person I'd want to sit down for 60 minutes and just be like, man, give me the download.
Yeah, he is amazing. I mean, it's a great Seattle company. I remember when they came to town and started it up, and I was an early believer in that. And my password was only 4 characters long. That's how long ago I signed up. Has since had to change, obviously. But it's just and there were a lot of naysayers. I mean, they had him going down for years that he's never going to make it, he's never going to get out of debt, and whatever. And obviously, he's proved them wrong. That's great. So, what one thing should PT step up and do now to improve our profession?
I think we need to develop our business acumen and leadership earlier on in the process. I think a lot of what we've seen, and I talked about this, is we have really solid clinicians who fall into leadership positions, or solid people who go out and open practices, and they have success, and they stumble, and they have their successes and failures over the course of their career. But I think if we truly want to watch our profession evolve and have long-term financial sustainability in private practice, and have these opportunities that are being created every day by our colleagues, we got to become stronger at leadership. And I think that even goes as far to say we got to get more PTs elected in representative positions. There's not a single physical therapist in Congress. Right. There's over 500 legislators, and I don't even know how many physicians, but we don't have one single PT representative. There's only been a handful of PTs that have even been state reps, in the last 50 years. And I think that's an opportunity too, like, have a seat at the table or be served on it. And I think that's the one area where, if we were going to invest resources, time, energy, developing more leadership potential and ability would probably give us the single biggest return on investment for the future.
Yeah, and I was in a conversation earlier, and we were talking a lot about, and I've talked a lot about over the years, but it's amazing to me in healthcare how few physical therapists are in positions of leadership within healthcare systems and so on. I mean, it's like, above the PT department, so you have nurses and physicians and other providers that serve these leadership or administrative roles, making these huge decisions on where things are going that involve physical therapy, and there's no physical therapist at the table. So I also think we as a profession need to get over the fact of not judging PTs that don't treat patients, that it's okay to move up in the ranks of these administrations and corporate structures and hospital systems and whatever, and have a seat at the table and be administrators. And you may not be treating patients, but you're still providing a very powerful and impactful position in the world of PT within the healthcare system.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's almost become more or less a stigma. Like, you get into this position. I'm thinking of a local colleague of ours here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He's a hospital president. And unless you knew him, you wouldn't know that he was a PT, because if you look at his bio, it says absolutely nothing about PT. And I think that's both a shame and a disservice for us as a profession, because if those healthcare leaders that are nurses, physicians, C-level type individuals were to look and say, you know what, he started off as a physical therapist and as a clinician, but he evolved into an executive, and that's okay. And as a profession, it's a win for us because we're like, wow, it's one of ours in a high leadership position. But I couldn't agree more.
It's interesting, too, along those same lines, as I've been talking to some newer professionals that have got into our profession and found out that maybe their joy or their gift isn't treating patients. They love the profession, they love the what it stands for and what it does, but they see it as not their gift. And so to move into more non-treating roles as a PT, they're excited about, but they feel really judged by their peers about, oh, geez, you took a spot from somebody trying to get in PT school or whatever, you're not even treating patients. So I think we need to get over that too, is that PTs can add significant value if they're not, treating patients, and they're more in leadership or administrative roles as well.
I absolutely agree. There's one colleague coming to mind that left to get into the financial services industry, and now he's helping new professionals, new grads, and small business owners with their finance needs. It's like, okay, he's not a practicing therapist, but the value he brings to a new professional or to a student or to a small business owner to help them with that financial piece is, and the fact that he understands the therapy world, that's immeasurable. And the stigma that is there is just unfounded. I mean, there are ways that we can contribute. I don't treat patients that much, and I think I bring a tremendous value that's non-clinical to our company. And, being comfortable with that is, I think, the other piece is just because I'm not treating patients doesn't mean I'm not contributing to the profession in a meaningful way.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a huge point that I hope everyone hears, because I think that it does make a difference. And that's not to mean that everyone should not be treating patients, because that's what the profession is built on, and that's what most of us went into the profession to do. But we do need those other people that are willing to take on those roles that make a significant difference outside of patient care. So we've talked a lot about leadership today. So kind of as we wind down here in this interview, I always ask for a pearl of wisdom. So in relation to leadership, what would your pearl of wisdom be for our listeners today?
I think relating to something I said earlier is recognize that you're not the resource and the infinite source of wisdom for everything, and that the value of listening is immeasurable. Meeting someone where they are, taking the time to just learn about the situation, step back, hear someone out, actively put yourself in their situation, demonstrate high levels of empathy as a leader, show people that you're willing to serve others first and not always be self-serving. I mean, I think there's some positive leadership attributes that can help contribute to someone's success in a leadership role.
Yeah, that's great words. Well, Mike, it's been just a great pleasure talking with you today. I'm very impressed with all you've accomplished in what I would consider a fairly short amount of time. So I just really appreciate all you do for the profession and for sharing your words of wisdom with us today. And thanks very much for being on the program.
Thank you again, Steve. It's my pleasure. And thank you for everything you've done for the profession as well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Profiles in Leadership, and thank you to VGM Advantage for supporting this program. Be sure to check out our entire library of video interviews and podcasts at vgmadvantage.com and orange.coaching.com, and of course on iTunes Podcasts under Profiles in Leadership.